As the international community continues to implement security measures to curb the spread of COVID-19, parents are now forced to look at options for teaching and learning. The United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, says that schools in 39 countries, including South Africa, have been closed, and this affects 420 million children and youth across the world. Now, to discuss remote learning and how this could be critical in the wake of this coronavirus outbreak, we're joined by Michelle Lissoos, who's a managing director at Think Ahead and iSchoolAfrica. Thanks so much for coming through this morning, Michelle.
Thank you very much for having me this morning. And I think it is an unprecedented time for education, for business in the world and in South Africa. And we've seen iSchoolAfrica and Think Ahead works with schools across South Africa. And we work with putting technology into schools. And we've seen an unprecedented force for schools and for parents to relook the way they're teaching and learning as schools around the country are closing.
So parents are concerned because, first off, this is an unprecedented situation, as you say. They don't necessarily know what to do. We're not just talking about content, we're just getting started. So what sort of advice do you have for parents in how to traverse this period, especially not knowing how long this is going to last?
So it was interesting because there were two of your previous speakers on the show this morning. One was about the panic buying of toilet paper. And I think we're actually seeing a panic buying of learning and a panic of the more resources I have, the better. And I think we also need to be calm about that and take advice from the experts. What I've seen among educating communities is the collaboration and the support of communities has been amazing. The different groups that have been set up. So I think Ahead has set up a Facebook group called From Couch to Class, which is about supporting teachers. And there's been an amazing community set up on Twitter called #ZAEDU, which is helping teachers to bridge this gap. And so I think that's the first thing, about really picking something, being structured and being connected. And I think what makes a successful classroom at home is, one is creative teachers, one is empowered parents, and the other is access to content. And I think those three things we need to work on together.
Now, the access to content is crucial, especially in an unequal society like ours, because we can talk about remote learning, but what does that actually mean for someone who's sitting in Umhlabuya Lingana somewhere? How do we bridge that divide at a time like this?
So I think UNESCO has very clearly said that when schools get disrupted, the people to suffer the most are disadvantaged children. And I think everyone is very aware of that, because we've seen the private schools step very quickly into remote learning. And it is very impressive to see how they've taken that from day one. They've got all the drives up, the remote learning up. The government schools are going into school holidays, so at this stage there seems to be a gap to prepare our schools for that. But I think access is going to be key so that the inequality doesn't get bigger and the digital divide doesn't get bigger. So there are two things we need to look at. We need to appeal to businesses and to providers to give access to connectivity. So we're seeing a lot of educational sites being zero rated, but we really need to appeal, because the minute we have access to content, it will actually be an opportunity to lessen that divide. And that is exciting. The other two aspects, that we can look at is, one is looking at ways of not relying 100% on online functionality. So looking at programs that there are advice from teachers, from educators, and looking at programs that can be creative that aren't relying 100% on technology.
So speaking of opportunity, this is a very disruptive period. And is this perhaps going to change the way we look at teaching and learning moving forward?
So there is an old saying that's saying necessity is the mother of invention. And I like to see this as necessity is the mother of adoption. what I think we will never ever have education the same as we've had it before. I would be very surprised if after when we come through this time, this disruption, that we will go back to traditional learning. I think we will review what has made us stronger. We will review what has made us, what has been our challenges, and we will take that and reshape education. And I think there are a few things that we mustn't forget going through this, that as the CEO of the JCE said before, is the human is at the center of this. And the student is at the center of this. And human connections are still important. And that is also important. And another aspect is teaching our students about digital citizenship. With all the fake news that is going around, it's other learnings that our students can take out from this. So I think as educators, as parents, as schools, we need to give our students access to the best content, and we need to structure it in a way that they come out of this with quite strong learnings in terms of the human, but also in terms of the student.
Michelle, what sort of options are there available, though, for disadvantaged families in terms of access at this point?
So at this point, there are different zero-rated sites. There are different programs being put in place by governments. So as we go into school holidays, because the government schools going, there are action plans being put in place, and then there also will be different links. There'll be different offline resources, and there'll be different advice for activity packs. But I think the big thing is for businesses to appeal for connectivity and access to devices.
So connectivity.
And sorry, one last thing is also for material to be accessed through television, through radio, and through mobile phones. So, for example, a lot of the sports channels aren't going to have a lot of sporting activities. So let's use radio, television, and mobile phones for content, for access for our students.
And because that's what I was going to ask you about, how do we make use of traditional mediums such as television, such as radio?
So important.
But how will this be done in such a short space of time? Because this isn't something that we had time to prepare for.
The one thing that is amazing is that such good content exists. The challenge has never been the content that exists. The challenge has always been the adoption. So now I think we force for the adoption. So I think there is quality content that exists. Now we need to bridge the gap between the student and that content in a way that meets the environmental challenges that we are now facing.
And perhaps just a final word of advice to our parents who are pulling their hair out at this point because they are faced with the prospect of literally stepping into that space of teaching.
I think I read a very good advice, some good advice yesterday, is your home doesn't need to replicate a school. It really needs to take advice from your school, take advice from teachers. I'm amazed how teachers have really pulled together and really keep the day structured. Don't forget about play, don't forget about outdoors, and really build on the communities, because there's some amazing communities out there that can support you.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle Lissoos, talking to us about, what you can do and the opportunities that exist at this point and how this disruption caused and brought about by the coronavirus outbreak is going to change the face of learning and teaching and move it into the digital space in absolute terms from here on in. So thanks so much. Michelle Lissoos is, of course, the MD, the Managing Director at Think Ahead and iSchoolAfrica. So with that, it's 7 o'clock, time for your latest news.